Hi, my name is Benedict for Higher Hertz. This video we will be looking at Kontakt 6 from Native Instruments. Now I'll let you know right up front that Kontakt is a huge subject. It's almost an unapproachable subject in its size if we were to try to cover remotely anywhere near everything. So I will absolutely not be doing that. So if you're thinking, but why isn't he talking about the intricacies of this, or why did he not even mention that? It's because it's too much. They will be more arcane features as a general rule. We'll look at the general overview. If you want to do some more research, no doubt there'll be ways to Google and look right into those things. We're just looking at an overview of what is this path, what's good about it, what might be an issue with it, because nothing's perfect. Nothing is, going to suddenly give you hits that siphon off all Drake's double D dollies. This is not the way the real world works, despite the fact that many people think that it does and should for them. Let's have a look at this as the tool that it is. So Native Instruments. Native Instruments are one of the biggest names in the music software industry. They have been around for a long time, and generally speaking, they well and truly deserve their reputation. They have a good product range. I don't really own any of their stuff, but that's, as I've said before, last video or video before or something, I tend to prefer different tools. But nonetheless, looking at what they do a very, very solid job, and that's largely what you want as a musician, a solid set of tools that are going to do what you want them to do. They are, however, not cheap. If we look at their pricing, and bear in mind this has been picked up in sale time of year, and at sale we've got, and this is Australian dollars, 300, but if you were buying normal time of year, you're looking at 599. Now that's Australian dollars. I'll try and do the conversion and flash that up on screen for you, but it's not the cheapest thing. But its more direct competitors are very similarly priced, because these things increasingly do an enormous number of tasks and manage to actually keep the ball in the air, so to speak. Alright, the other warning that I will give you is that I am using the demo of Kontakt, which you can download and use for free, and in certain ways there are no limitations, and in certain other ways there are some limitations. The limitation we're going to meet here is that once you go into demo mode for Kontakt as a sampler, which we will have a bit of a look over, then it will turn itself off every 15 minutes, so you may even see that happen, or see me restart to deal with the fact that that has happened. Now, Kontakt is mostly known as being a sample player, which is fine. They've pushed most of their effort into that. If we look, again, actually I'll just pull up, where's my mouse, over here, pull up this image, you see the Kontakt, and then I had to go sort of halfway down the page to get this. It's kind of buried. They're no longer specifically or directly selling Kontakt. That's not to say they aren't selling it, they are, but in terms of their marketing, they're marketing Complete, which is more the whole bundle of sample library things that come around it than the actual tool. And fair enough, market forces means that more people are interested in getting, a picked nylon guitar or a whole pile of sounds, guaranteed to win them Grammys and all that kind of stuff, than they are in actually, working out how to do those sounds themselves. I get that. But one of the difficulties is that we can be short-circuiting our craft a lot if we're not really learning how to do the stuff underneath. So it does mean that when you approach Kontakt initially, it can be a bit tricky to find it, because you'll keep finding Complete instead of Kontakt. The pressure is always on the idea of, well, let's simplify all of this for you. Yeah, there are some things that can be simplified. Like having an automatic car simplifies the driving process for most, but it does take away some of the safety features of a manual car. So for most of you, when you open Kontakt, however you've got it, as directly as Kontakt or through Complete or whatever, Most of you will be looking at what you've got in your collections, your instruments, and this is a way that most people will use it and never go any further. Fair enough if you're getting the results that you need. If not, if you're going, oh, my productions somehow seem, then either you need to be digging below the surface yourself, or you need to be engaging with the services of someone who does dig below the surface to bring you that flow and uniqueness. And that could be a sound designer or a sound engineer, your mix engineer, or even two. I know that Trent Reznor of Nine Inch Nails had sound designers, just people who sat there in the corner going bleep, 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 to make potential Nine Inch Nails sounds. So in terms of use, it's going to depend a little on your on what libraries you've got and how each of those libraries is behaving, because Kontakt is incredibly driven by scripts. If you're using it the way that I'm going to show here, not so much, but the way that you're going to be using it this way, very driven by scripts. So your library, if you've set things up properly and you'd like the Spitfire stuff, you've got to set it up properly. It's not quite as bulky as Spitfire at the moment, but it has its moments. If you don't do it right, it won't work. So you can look into instruments and multis and what have you. I have, and the only paid Kontakt thing that I have is the orchestra. So we'll open the NKI, which is the instrument as such, with all its scripts. Oh, look, I'm orchestral. It's an orchestralizonator thing. And you'll tend to go through them and find lots of patches for things. And this is absolutely not an ad for the orchestra. Simply showing the kinds of things that you're prone to getting. And if they're nicely designed, then you've probably got several layers of things, including the ubiquitous reverb needing to be switched off. This has been the massive market strength of Kontakt, that above and beyond any other potential competitor, whether that's UVI or Reason with their refill and their instrument development toolkit, Gorilla Engine from UJAM, who are another competitor, Kontakt just captured the market in that. So that's why it's kind of the ubiquitous, I'll just buy this and sound pro thing. Behavior is fairly consistent, but you will need to take a few goes to get used to it. Depending upon your library, you might have things like the ability to open up subsets of the library and then control via scripting that you don't see articulations, and often they are chosen by key commands, and that's off my keyboard. So if you're pressing this key, it will switch to that articulation or that function. That's the nature of scripting. Do this, that happens. And the scripting can become quite clever, and that's really been the massive strength of Kontakt as a sample playing device. So what's good and what's bad? Let's run through these, and then we will have a bit of a look at Kontakt really at the coalface. What's good? It is, as I've said already, very powerful in the scripting department. You can do things that's pretty hard to do with most other sampling instruments. I have never gotten into scripting, so I'm not going to talk about it past having a general understanding of how it gets done. A lot of times those scripting languages are similar to a language like Lua, so it's not as simple as writing in direct English, oh, when this happens, I want you to do that. Although that's essentially what the scripting does. And it gets convoluted, and if you don't get it right, the whole thing face plants. It sounds really clean, and that's been a big draw and a big marketing thing of Kontakt. Oh, we are so clean, we're one of the cleanest, if not the cleanest sample out there. It does sound really clean. It has a pretty open architecture. I don't think they're the leaders in that anymore, but nonetheless it has a pretty darned open architecture, meaning that there's a fair amount that you can do within the box that you have purchased. To be fair, we should look at the other side of things. Everything, as I said before, has its limits. It is, because it's so powerful, especially if you get into scripting and that open architecture, it's a little bit hard work. It is costly, but again, you're getting a huge amount of stuff that it will do, and generally in a very high quality kind of a way. The last one that I've got here is that everyone uses it. And that's one of the reasons that I'm not immediately drawn to it, because Kontakt kind of has a sound. And while it's a really good sound, it's also not a unique sound. So if you're one of those people that just grabs stock libraries, whether you've paid lots for them or not, if you grab those stock libraries and drop them straight into your track and straight into your mix, especially using the onboard reverb, so you've got like a different reverb for every single instrument in your mix, the problem is you have exactly the same sound everybody else has because you haven't personalized it. It's not a massive liability, but it is a potential hole to not fall into. I also think that perhaps it could use a little bit of an overhaul in the GUI department, because I think it's getting a little small and pokey and a little But at the same time, I understand for them to do an overhaul and not have heavyweight users be all bent out of shape about it and confused because they suddenly can't find the doohickey would be a very unwise strategy. So, swings and roundabouts. Let's now move to having a overview of the real original heart of Kontakt, and that is not in the libraries, but in looking at files. I've gone to a file folder where I have samples, very simple samples, sample to middle C, spread across the keyboard. Nice and simple. Drag that into here and it's like, ooh. I now have that sample playing across the keyboard. On its own, it looks a little, what are we going to do with this? And it does take a little bit of getting used to. If we press the spanner, then it opens up and it starts to look like a sample playing instrument. And if you've watched the TAL video or what have you, you'll start to see there is some similarity, because a lot of manufacturers have gone, oh, okay, well, this is what Kontakt does, and it's become the industry standard. Plus, a lot of what Kontakt did was based on the industry standards of when they started doing this. So it's a little circular. Let's close up all of these piles of insert effect boxes, because they are just initially confusing. I don't think they should be open. People disagree with me, but this is me coming in. Options, groups, I'm not going to get into it all, but there's a window for everything. We've got our mapping editor, so for the moment we can see that that sample that I dragged in is, as I said, mapped to middle C and stretched across the whole keyboard. If we wanted to do something different from that, we could pull this back and, let's say, I don't know, the big obi, we could drag that to there, and so now that's called mapping. But we're not going to do that because I want to keep this as simple as possible. We've seen mapping in lots of other things. If you want to get your head around mapping for drums and what have you, it's essentially what you just saw there. We can change the level of a sample coming in, and that's often a good idea because they're very, very loud, and you will find that things start to drive or distort. For drums, you want them to be as loud as possible. For waves like this, you generally don't. So if you're finding it's too loud, pull it back here. It does mean that you'll be changing what you're pushing into your filters, but you've got to decide where you want your things to get interesting. All this stuff up here, I'm going to leave right alone. We have various play modes for our sample, which actually is not available. Oh, before I go further, there is a wave editor. Not going to get into a single thing on this page because I have no idea. It's not that I don't know how to do these things, it's just you've got to read the manual on this stuff. You kind of really do, unless you spend a lot of time doing that kind of sample work. I just don't. And then the script editor, which I'm not going to touch on other than the fact that it's there. So we've got a very simple sample map. We've got different ways to play back. There's sampler. Sampler is classic in that it's pulled this into RAM, and the sample's being played back from RAM. DFD seems very obscure. I had to look that up. It means direct from disk. With a tiny sample like this, that's like this long, irrelevant. You're probably better with sample mode than DFD, but that's more for large samples and large sample sets. So if I was pulling in a whole grand piano with 10-second long sample per note sample, then that's a massive amount of data to be holding in current memory. I mean, I'm flat out remembering my own name in my current memory, let alone several gigabytes of samples, in which case direct from disk means that it streams it from the disk in real time. There's a wavetable option, which means for any of you who understand what wavetables are, then you can cycle through a prepared sample. Great for wubby stuff. Whether that's a good or bad wavetable player, don't know. We've then got Tone Machine, and Tone Machine is, well, all of these ones here, except for these ones, I don't know what they do. Specifically, they're obviously naming old drum machines, so they're probably just set up to sound or behave a bit like that. Won't get into them, but really, essentially, all of this stuff, they're all time stretch and or grain options. So they're taking your sample, slicing it up into tiny little bits, and then munging it back out in different ways. So you will get different parameters for them. Not my role to be going into all of those. If you've got some settings and then change engine mode, you can find some of those settings get changed or disappeared, because not everything is supported in every mode. Understandable. But simple sample, playing back a sample. You'll see this is moving. This is because this is modulated. If we click on the modulation tab, a tiny tab, then we can see our assignments. Everything is pretty visual, and in a sense it's not bad, but once you get past the basics, it can get a little convoluted. So we can close that back up again. Here's our envelope. If you are thinking, oh, well, where's my envelope for this thing? I can see I've got a modulator, but where is it? You can click on this and it will jump to it and put a red ring around it, well, a yellow ring, but it doesn't alliterate, does it? Functional, works fine, and you can do it the other way around as well. So if you're here and you want to go to that, then it'll bounce back up and down. So if you wonder what those are, it's a go-to, an anchor. Envelopes as we'd expect. 15 seconds is okay. Not perfect for space musicians like myself, but okay. You can change some of the curves, but not all of them. It's not the most clever, but it's clever enough, and you can get rid of the other knobs if you are doing the drum thing. So there's a reasonable amount of power in there. There are options to bypass a certain modulation, and there are presets for things as well, should you want to leg up or to be lazy. So that's setting up a... But it's not a very nice sound, is it? In which case, you're now presented... Remember, we had all of these? It took me a little bit to work out where I should be putting the inside synth architecture. They actually go up in here. So if I go to a filter, we've got a pretty big bag of filters. We will not be going through all of them by any stretch of the imagination. We will look at... Let's go with a ladder LP4. Alright, cool. But if I want to do something with it, at the moment it's pretty static. So we know we need a modulator. In a standard fixed architecture or semi-fixed architecture synth, we'd already see an envelope sitting over there going, oh, I could use that. Here we don't. We have to create that. We have to instance everything that we want. And there are a couple of ways of doing it. We can press the Mod tab and add a modulator. Or we can right-click and add a modulator, whether that's an external MIDI source, from scripts, all kinds of things, LFOs, or we're after an envelope. So we've applied an envelope. Let's scoot to it. Ooh, look. Thank you for your assistance. It's working. The default is 100%, which I think is a little excessive. It leads you to be like, oh, what have I got here? But different people have different... So now, we have a synth happening, and it sounds nice. Like I say, there's this kind of clean transparency to it, which is pleasing, really is pleasing. Doesn't make it better, just makes it what it is. If you go, oh, well, my productions will sound better if I use this, probably not. They will just sound like you've used expensive synths. So don't feel like you can't write great music if you don't have such a perfect, clean system. We can, if we want, go through and change our filter. And we can keep adding modulators to our heart's content. Let's say our tuning, let's LFO that. Pitch LFO here. Okay, cool. It seems a little heavy-handed. So let's close that modulator there. Styling. That's the essence of synthesis within Kontakt. And again, it does sound nice. It behaves very nicely. But if you don't know much about synth creation and architecture, it's easy to get lost, especially seeing you end up having this great big box just full of modulators, and they don't feel as directly related to what's happening up here as you might hope. But the more you understand it, the easier it gets to work with. Then we've got all these effect boxes, buses, inserts, sends. Read the manual on those. I have not looked into them. I know broadly what those terms mean. Of course I would after 30 years. But exactly how they operate in here I'm not going to go into. But your main effects, they're on the end. So if we grab what might we want to do? We might want to have a chorus. Let's go with the old legacy chorus. Sounds really nice. It's smooth, it's wide, it sounds great. It's got separate wet and dry knobs. I do like that. The weird thing is that they, at 0 dB, they've got like another 24 dB of gain. I haven't seen that before. I sort of feel like I'd rather have more flexibility on the downside of the mix than the upside of the mix, but don't know. What I like about those is that they don't necessarily sap level out of things. See how they actually add level, which to me makes sense. I understand the argument for saying, oh, well, if we're adding another 3 or 6 dB, seeing we've suddenly doubled the signal, that we probably should help you out by reducing the overall level by that 3 or 6 dB. That makes perfect sense logically, but when I add a chorus or a delay, I'm adding to my sound. I'm not necessarily wanting it to suddenly halve in level, because then it feels like the more you add choruses and delays and stuff, the tinier your sound gets. And I know you can then just go turn the level up, but it's not my preferred way. So up to you which way you go, but I do like that. So you can add effects. Let's add a delay. And this is where I go, oh, geez, that mixing range seems awfully squidgy and tight. It's a nice delay. Yeah, how everything feels nice and lovely. And reverb. I would not be putting a lot of reverb on here if this were my piece and I were going to be mixing it, because I'd be putting the reverb out there in the real world, but you want to see and hear it. And again, this is where I feel like the tiny throw on the below 0 dB side. So when you open up a Kontakt library and you get these sounds that sound like they're doing this sort of thing, that's just what's going on under the hood. They're then scripted to make some kind of big mogy buttons and knobs and what have you to make you feel mogy. And so you take it as like, ooh, it sounds so mogy. It's just their form of doing things, and it is nice. That works really, really well. And it's sort of as simple as that, but just understand here, look, we've got a lot of things closed down because it gets increasingly difficult to actually see our patch in a flowing way when we're having to scroll from place to place. But I understand the inevitability of this kind of system, especially for the time when it was first being designed, that we're looking at something that can grow vastly bigger than what we've got here. Because if we got into, there we go, if we got into layers of samples and having them all do different things to make our one sound, then we would end up with a lot of complexity. And so they're trying to provide this one system by which we can just grow our architecture as we go. So to get around this, I close and I shall open a new one. So native, which generally comes under N, Kontakt, let's whack it up top there, open it up, tends to go back to where I was before, which I generally quite like as a thing. If we take our sound, we'll quickly brush through that again. Let's use the Pro 53, so that's their emulation of the Prophet filter. We'll pull that right down. We'll external source, learn MIDI. Waggle my knob. Brilliant. That's going to be useful later. Let's assign that. And we won't do anything with this. We'll close these fellas up. There is a method to this madness. It lets you see same things again, but we're also going to do a little bit of comparison. We all know that I like to comparisonate. So say about 470. It's hard to get specific times, but you can type them in. Feedback, let's roll a little off top and bottom, and whatever, and about that. All right, that gives us the basic structure that we need. I'll close this down. Now, no doubt there is an arpeggiator type system in there. I took a quick look, didn't find it or get my head around it. That's not to say that it's not good, that it's not there, that it's not workable. Not at all. It's just there's only so much time I'm going to put into a system that doesn't make itself immediately apparent. So please don't scream at me because I didn't use the self-evident feature that anyone who's been using this for 97 years would know. We're just looking across the board. I'm going to add an arpeggiator here. We'll dial that up to +3 octaves. Now it is running too loud. I forgot that I should go into the mapping editor and slave some shifts. Now let's go one step further. Let's pull that from there. We can even get rid of its mix channel. That really does sound nice. Very simple, but sounds really nice. So let's actually compare. I have made essentially the same sound, note that, essentially the same sound, but exactly the same sequence across a collection of instruments. So we've got Kontakt from Native Instruments, UVI's Workstation. I've only used their Workstation because I don't have Falcon, please. I'd love to review Falcon, but there's no demo. But the Workstation at least allows us to do a comparable thing. So if we're thinking, well, okay, I like the idea of Kontakt, but I don't think I like Kontakt for my workflow, what are my other options? Well, we run through a few of them. The UVI Workstation is free. However, you can't do what I just did before in terms of the synthesis. You can play a sample, but you can't synthy it. It's got no onboard envelopes and what have you that you can access. You've got to go to Falcon for that. But we can give a sense of what its engine sounds like. There's also Kontakt Sampler. I did a review on Kontakt Sampler. That's still playing the same sample, got essentially the same settings. And then Reason's trusty NNXT. I've used inbuilt effects for the first ones, but because NNXT doesn't come with any inbuilt effects, thankfully, then I've used stock echo and reverb. So essentially all the same patch. Now our Kontakt is loud, which is not entirely fair. So as we can hear, despite the fact that Kontakt has a lovely sound, using very simple architecture, they all have pretty well an equally lovely sound. So Kontakt, just to get the apparently more lovely than everybody else sound, is of some value. I'm not going to say it's a nothing and sweep it under the carpet and pretend it doesn't exist, because it does sound lovely when you make that sound, its envelopes and its effects and what have you. It does sound lovely. But the thing is not the only game in town, that you do have other options. Now, UVI's Falcon, as I said, I can't access because there is no demo, and the Workstation is not able to do the same thing. But nor is Kontakt until you buy it, as in nor is Falcon until you buy it. Kontakt Sampler is a different proposition. It's a much smaller instrument, doesn't have a lot of the bigger background features, but it also doesn't have the same price tag. But it's a good basic instrument out of which you could do an awful lot. Or if you have Reason or something similar, then its NXT is similarly transparent. Again, I'm not going to say that if you had Kontakt, Falcon, or Omnisphere, which I don't have access to or I would have popped in here, that you aren't overall going to get a slightly nicer sound, but that's tiny. If your potential fans are walking away because you don't sound exactly like every other record that they like that's using Kontakt or whatever, then they were never your fans in the first place. You haven't done anything unique enough for them to like you. They just want somebody to give them that exact sound. And they don't care where it comes from, whether it's you or Comtrues or whoever. They don't actually care. They'll thank you for giving it to them for free, but they won't remember your name. Except other than, oh, I remember this drug dealer gave me the fix I wanted at the time. That's okay if you're looking for quick likes and accolades, but they won't pay for it. So I'm in no way saying don't get Kontakt, or don't get this, or get that instead. I'm simply saying that if you think Kontakt is the way to sound pro, nah, not at all, not at all. The instruments that were being used in the early days of electronic music and the early days of rock as we know it, those days where amazing stuff was being done, its amazingness wasn't about the instruments or the tape recorders. It wasn't about any of that stuff. It was just that they were going, ooh, what if we did this? I was off at a musical and I heard them use a trumpet. Here, let's put a trumpet in our thing. Or better than that, let's use a flugelhorn. You have me at flugelhorn every time. So use what you got. If you have the budget and the time and the inclination to dig into Kontakt past just libraries, then it's great. It really is. The same goes with what I anticipate to be the case with Falcon and Omnisphere. Definitely doable with TAL. As you see, if you go back and watch my TAL video, I made a piece using nothing but TAL, and that record has been the fastest selling record that I ever made. I'm not going to credit that to TAL because the whole record wasn't made with TAL, but my point is that I didn't need Kontakt to make the fastest selling record I ever made. It is a good product, but it is a deep product, which you can either just say, well, I'm not going to go past the surface, I'm just going to download pre-made libraries, and hopefully, as I said before, we'll work out how to make your sound out of, rather than just kind of sticky taping them onto the front of your mix and going, now it sounds pro because I got this pro sound, because that ain't how it really works. At least not with the people who are likely to go, oh, wow, what a cool record, I got to buy that. Because they're the only people who are actually financially supporting you, who are going to remember your name when your record comes up and they go, oh yeah, I remember getting that. That's a great record. I want to listen to that record. That's when you've got a fan. Stick with it past the surface, and just use libraries is one way, or use or don't use libraries and dive right into it and build up your own libraries and your own structure of how to make your own sounds, because it really does sound great. There are nice filters in there, nice effects. Note how most times with onboard effects I say, look, just don't do it. I will still say be very careful, because you don't want to ruin your mix with 37 different reverbs for 37 different sounds, but the effects on board inside the Kontakt system are lovely, and you've got the ability to do some things which are a little harder. Like in NNXT, I can't insert any kind of saturation or drive between the sample and the filter. There's no facility for that. Whereas in Kontakt, I can have my thing here. I can add a, it'll be under stomps. I can add a saturation, drag it over here. I now have saturation in front of my sound. That's a really nice thing. Not all sample players can do it. An increasing number probably can, but it's a smallish thing on the surface but becomes a big thing down the track, in the sense that you notice how it changes the nature of that sample. So my oscillator now is different as it's going into the front of the filter. Anything that's available here I can do. I can use compression before. Why, I'm not sure, but I could. I can put in various things. Not everything will go in everywhere. I'm noticing this. So we've got the ability to do some things here that are a little harder elsewhere. As I said, quick overview, very, very powerful system. But before you rush into it thinking that it's just the immediate solution to all that's wrong with your music, don't. It's a massive tool, not to do your job for you, but with which you can do a pretty stellar job, provided you're providing the real inspiration that drives the music. Now, if you have any questions, not technical support for Native Instruments, please, that I am not that, but questions about the general stuff that we have discussed here, pop them down below. I will answer them as soon as I'm aware. I generally try to look fairly quickly. And oh, please hit the subscribe button, because that tells us and tells YouTube that that we are doing valuable work and helps keep this whole bowl rolling. Oh, and you can pop over to higherhertz.com as well and subscribe there, a different channel of information. You have a great day now.